Well, good afternoon. I'm going to do a bit of a lecture about what is commonly referred to as print media and serials. But what I'm really talking about, if you will, are materials that are physically in libraries. Now, mind you, most serials today are electronic more than in print, but I want to talk about them from the print aspect, the things that are physically in libraries as opposed to all the electronic resources that libraries use. So when I talk about print media and serials, I'm actually talking about not only books, but actually publications in the forms of magazines and journals and newspapers that are found in the library physically. So I'm talking about physical things in a library. So let's get started, and we'll talk a little bit about each of them in sequence, along with some other little things that I want to talk about that are in the book and also not in the book. So let's get started. Well, first of all, as I mentioned in my first media, is that books, media, and serials are talking about anything that is in print, anything physical in the library. Media, specifically, can be anything in the library that is not a print publication. It could be audio, tapes, CDs, etc. It could be video, either VHS tapes or CDs or Blu-rays. It can be photographs that are held by a library, historical photographs or any kind of photographs that a library might own, or maps, anything physical. So let's get started, and we'll do each of them in sequence and talk about some aspects of them, both from a collection standpoint and how the library would handle them. Okay, well, first of all, we'll talk about book. Now, of course, books are bought for the use by patrons. So when you buy a book in a collection, you're not buying a book for your own personal use, obviously. You're buying it may be for your own personal use too, but it's used by patrons of the library. Now, how this operates is, even the libraries have existed for years. One of the things that protects libraries today is what's referred to as the first sale doctrine. This was a Supreme Court case between Bobbs Merrill Company, which is a publisher, and Strauss, which are actually two brothers, the Strauss brothers, who owned the Macy's department store. This was at the time when Macy's first started and was owned by the two brothers that are Strauss. Anyway, Bobbs Merrill published a book, Hildreth, if I remember correctly, the person who the book was at the time, but it was Bob Merrill's was the company that published the book. And in the book, they had a statement that said it's a violation of copyright to sell the book for anything less than $1. Of course, this was years ago, but they had a price in the book for which the book is supposed to be sold. And the Strauss had bought the book, or copies of the book, and they sold them, but they sold them for less than the $1 that was on the cover of Bobbs Merrill. So they were selling it for a little bit less, but regardless, they were selling it for less money. Bobbs Merrill took them to court, and it ended up in the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, they ruled in favor of Strauss. It's a term referred to as the first sale doctrine, meaning that Strauss bought the copy of the book from Bobbs Merrill. After they bought the book for the cost that Bobbs Merrill sold it for, they could sell it for anything that they wish. Once you buy a physical book, It is up to the person who's bought the book how they choose to deal with it. It's called for sale. And so a library that buys a book can legally, under the for sale doctrine, lend the book to others. You could give the book away, you could sell the book, but you own the book having bought it, and so it's up to the person who bought the book that they can do what they wish with the book, and it's called the for sale doctrine. Now, the for sale doctrine, of course, is based on lawful ownership, meaning that a library buys a book for a price, and because they now are the legal owner of the book, they can do pretty much anything they'd like to do with the book. Now, you should note that the for sale doctrine does not actually work for digital. Many digital programs, like say Word, you're not actually buying the book. You're not buying the software like Word. You're leasing the software, and there's a contract in it. This is that you're not actually buying it. You're leasing it, and by the leasing, you have the right to have it on one computer, in theory, and so your contract allows for one use on one computer. Libraries, for example, who buy many copies of, say, Word, are buying a leased copy for X number of computers. In other words, they're paying a price, which may not be the full price for Word, but as Word sells it, but they've made a negotiation with Word, essentially, to put it on a certain number of computers. They usually, when you buy something, when you get at least Word or something, you're going to say, I'm going to use it on 10 computers or 20 computers, but you pay a price based on the number of computers. Now, one of the situations that work with digital is another lawsuit that occurred between Capitol Records and a company called Redigit Inc. Now, Redigit Inc. no longer exists. If you actually link to the Redigit, if you do a search for or link to Redigit, it just takes you to a LinkedIn page, which is actually a dead page. So the company really no longer exists. Now, what happened was Capitol Records would put their music using iTunes so that people could purchase a copy of a song through iTunes. And what Redigit Inc. did was get these programs off iTunes and try to release them. And Capitol Records took them to suit, and Capitol Records, in this case, won the case, and it's regarding digital, saying the reason why Redigit tried to do the for sale doctrine, but it did not make it to the Supreme Court. This was done on a state level court. But what it said was that the for sale doctrine does not apply because you're not buying a physical item. You're just making a copy of something that is electronic. Therefore, you're not actually purchasing it. You're getting a copy of it. And so that is why digital does not fit really under the for sale doctrine. We'll talk about electronic books later, but actually in the case of electronic books, there's another whole host of issues, but it really comes down to the point of a publisher allowing a use, receiving a cost for a use by the programs. You're not able to download the programs permanently, but you're able to use them for a period of time. We'll discuss those a little bit more, but basically, for sale doctrine operates with print, and digital does not fall under the for sale doctrine. Now, of course, there are many types of books that a library will purchase. Traditionally, a library will purchase either hardcovers or trade paperbacks. Now, hardcovers last much better on the shelf, and so libraries tend to buy hardcovers of the books they buy, for longevity on the shelf and multiple use. Now, trade paperbacks are not as good in terms of longevity as hardcovers, but they are much better. Much better binding, much better quality paper. In many cases, trade paperbacks use kind of a glossy paper that has a bit of longevity, much as a hardcover has a very solid cover. These things fit very nicely on a shelf. Now, the other one that people tend to get are what's referred to as mass market paperbacks. These are publications that are done in more of a pulp fashion, binding. They do not last long in a library. Libraries do buy mass market paperbacks, often keeping them in separate locations because of the different size, whereas hardcovers and trade paperbacks are roughly the same dimensions. Mass market paperbacks are usually much smaller. Now, when it comes to both hardcovers and trade paperbacks, there are many commercial printers like HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, and Knopf, and the major publishers. We'll talk about how to locate some of them specifically. Mass market paperbacks are usually published by frequently published by major publishers, but there are also publishers specifically for mass market paperbacks. Ace, for example. And then, of course, there are university presses, religious presses, and reprint copies. University presses are presses associated with usually major universities, and they tend to publish books that are either by professors or alumni. They do other things as well, but their primary issue would be a lot of nonfiction in many cases. And if they did much in the way of fiction, which is not common for university presses, it would probably be a university professor. But in short, a lot of university presses are nonfiction presses. There are religious presses, many different types. Zondervan comes to mind as a Christian press, but you will find many different presses that are for a variety of religions, and you will get some materials from them as well if you're looking for treatises that fit into that category. Now, there are reprint copies. Now, obviously, there are publishers that deal with online, that deal with out of print, like Abe books and such, which deal with out of print books. But then there are reprint presses as well. Dover Publications comes to mind. What Dover does is it takes books that are generally out of print and makes a new printed copy of the book, frequently doing a trade paperback copy. They tend not to do hardcover, they tend to do trade paperbacks, but Dover Press is a reprint copy location. Knowing these different presses is useful for getting information as you're searching for types of books. Now, when it comes to selection of books from the collection development person, you need to determine what kind of books to order. And the tools that can be used, some of these will be in a selection assignment, but in general, one that is commonly used are catalogs and advertisements that are given to libraries. Libraries frequently will receive catalogs from different presses, different publishers, and different vendors for materials that they have. And often these are used by libraries to learn about new books that are coming out. Now, from a collection standpoint, reviewing sources are the best tool to use to find out about the book. You can learn about the book in the catalog, but it's the reviewing sources that will give you an idea if the book is quality. You may look at the catalog and say, oh, I recognize this book, I'll order this book, but it's the reviewing sources that will give you information about those. Now, there are different electronic resources. Many of the print resources are also electronic, and Amazon is one that I would use as an example, in the sense of you can actually search Amazon, and what Amazon does is it gives you reader reviews, not professional reviews, but reviews by readers. Another one that I would list here would be like Good Books, for example. Good Books is used a list of books that readers have read and commented about, so they're personal reviews. Now, then there are also a lot of news sources. NPR, National Public Radio, New York Times Book Review, etc. Often people will come into the library asking for a new book because they heard about it on NPR. A lot of times NPR will do author, talk to authors and who's got a new book, and they'll talk about the book. And so a lot of times you'll get in, particularly public libraries, you'll get a person requesting a book because they heard about it on NPR. Now, there's a couple of websites I've got linked here. Of course, I always make these files available. The raw, the document here. NPR has a best book site, and Readsy will also show some of the largest book publishers. Other things that libraries will use are bestseller lists, such as Publishers Weekly, and journals, especially library-oriented journals like Library Journal and School Library Journal, and specific journals from the American Library Association and others. Journals are often used. Library Journal is used, has good reviews written by librarians. And what Library Journal does is it does a list where it shows the most popular publications of the week, like the bestseller list, and also publishes the in each Dewey area there are going to be the new books in the Dewey areas with reviews written by librarians. Same with School Library Journal. Some publications, like School Library Journal, will have articles written by people in the article who says, I'm reading or listening to this book currently. Other things that you'll find, in addition to all the various American Library type publications, like this, there are so many different ones that that have book information. There are also specific journals, journals in the field of study. I did chemistry, and so I'd look at chemical and engineering news for book reviews. I would look at a variety of other journals, in chemistry journals, because a lot of times they would have reviews by faculty. Another one that you can think of in this case is whatever your specific field of study is, there may be a journal in that field of study, science, nature, history, whatever publication is in your field of study, I'll often have reviews in those publications. Another journal I didn't mention here, but I will print it in a copy that I post, is a publication called Choice. What Choice does is a review source where reviews are written by professors in the field of study, in that particular field, and it's aimed for universities. Another good use are publications like BookPage or various book lists. BookPage is a monthly publication that comes out that has reviews written by interested people in that field, professional reviewers, shall we say. It'll have books on children's books. It'll have, the most popular children, but it'll have like a list of most for each month. It'll have like a list of, it'll have a reviewer that does cookbooks. It'll have a reviewer that does children's books. It'll have a reviewer that does literature, new books. So BookPage comes to libraries frequently. There's often a package of them given out, and they're often designed to be given to patrons. And it does list new books in the field in particular areas. Now, another thing that's very useful for libraries to use are what's called core lists. Now, core lists are lists of publications. In other words, a good library will have in this particular field of study these specific books. It's called a core list. In other words, these are the books that you're supposed to have. Often core lists are used for public libraries, but school libraries, but there are a lot of them for university, college libraries. List of books that are standard books that you should have. The core list can be found in books of core lists. It can also be found in journal articles, a core list that's in a journal article. Often core lists are used by accreditation organizations that come to schools. It may be like a school may be accredited by history or business or something, and they expect to have a specific list of books that should be in the library. And often these accreditation agencies send a message to the library and say, do you have these specific books? Libraries, university libraries particularly, will take a list from the accreditation agency and make sure they have those books. So when the accreditation comes to the university, they've got the books. Accreditation is used in library schools. The American Library Association does an accreditation. Now, what they do specifically in the American Library Association, they do not accredit the school. They accredit the program. So you go to a library school. Library school itself talks about accreditation, but the school itself is not accredited. The program that they offer is accredited. So when you get a library degree from an accredited institution, and they talk about ALA accreditation, they're not actually accrediting the school as much as they're accrediting the program that is offered by the school. So by going to a school that's an accredited school and you have what's referred to as a degree that has been acknowledged by the American Library Association, in this particular case, and like in many cases, they're not accrediting the school, they're accrediting the program that the school offers. So take a look at these things, and perhaps you'll get an idea of some publications. Now, some of the publications, not only like, say, Publishers Week, Library Journal, etc., are not just print publications, they're also electronic publications. A lot of tools that you use, you may look at the print, you may use the print, but many of these resources are also electronic. So as you look at the selection assignment, you can use the same source twice. You could say the source in print has these features. The source electronically has these features. Sometimes there's advantages to using print and sometimes there's advantage using electronic, but you can look at both of them. So when we talk about the publications, I would hope to have different ones, but you can look at them, either a print one or an electronic one. So let's get talking a little bit more about other topics here. Now, when it comes to ordering books, it is up to the library's acquisition department to find the least expensive copy of something. When you're developing a selection list and you have a list of books, you should put in what you think the book costs. It's called encumbrance. You're going to say, I'd like to order this book, and this book costs $30. And so you're going to encumber in your file for $30. Now, the acquisitions department is going to try to find the least expensive copy, and they should let you know what they actually order and receive. So a lot of times what I would do is I would say the book costs $30, and this is what I tell the acquisitions department. And then the acquisitions department, looking for the least expensive copy, will find one for $20. And so what they should do is they should notify me, or the selector, that it's not $30, it was $20 when it was received. And then what you can do is you can go back into your list and you can change the $30 to actually what was spent, say $20. And now, instead of encumbering $30, you're encumbering $20. So if you have a specific number of dollars that you're supposed to spend in the year, that $10 makes a big difference. For example, by changing the encumbrance to the actual order, you encumber this so that you know where you stand in the number of dollars that you ordered. But when you actually get the cost from acquisitions, you put in the true cost, and now you know exactly where you stand in your selection list. Acquisitions do not usually order directly from a publisher or a source. They usually use a vendor. Vendors, for example, are Baker and Taylor. And for universities, a lot of them will use a system called Yankee Book Peddler. Now, Yankee Book Peddler specializes in universities, but is a subsidiary of Baker and Taylor. So Baker and Taylor is one of the primary vendors that libraries will have contracts with. They get the best prices for what they're ordering. Now, of course, there is other sources that libraries will use for different things, and Amazon is an example. Maybe you need to get something very quickly, and you go to Baker and Taylor, which may have some time to get the book to you, and you might go to Amazon to get the book. Now, the advantage of using a source like Baker and Taylor is what's referred to as pre-cataloged. In other words, Baker and Taylor knows how you prefer to catalog a book, what kind of catalog numbering you wish to put on the spine or different things. And a lot of times Baker and Taylor will give you pre-cataloged books. They'll give you a book with all the various sundry information that can easily go into the library's ILS, maybe with some minor changes. You occasionally get books from Baker and Taylor that is classified in one field of study, and you choose to put in a different field of study. So there are some things that libraries can do, even with pre-catalog books, to modify where they fit on the collection. But often materials will come pre-cataloged, and it saves a lot of effort. Now, another tool that is used by acquisitions, but it can also be used by a selector, are tools such as a publication called Books in Print. Now, what Books in Print does is it allows you to look up a particular book and see who publishes the book and potential costs for the book. Some libraries get Books in Print actually as a physical book, and other libraries get Books in Print in an electronic fashion. But the point is, you can use Books in Print to learn what is actually available in print. So Books in Print is used not only by the acquisitions department, but it can be readily used by a collection selector. I often use books in print in a printed source to get information about a book, ISBNs, different things that you might want to find about the book. Now, of course, there's media. Media is generally classified as anything that's like audio, video, photographs, or maps. Now, audio and video both have changed over the years. For example, when audio first came out, it was like reel-to-reel and such. More commonly, it was cassette, later CD-ROMs, and frequently, sometimes nowadays, what's referred to as MP3, CDs in MP3 format. There are some systems like for example, in my car can handle MP3 format. The difference is that if you get a CD-ROM of a book, it might take up multiple CD-ROMs, whereas it will only take up one MP3. MP3 is much more of a compact version, but it can only be used by certain people. So audio and video have changed over the years. You can get in audio, you can get a system called Playaway, which is like a little book in a hard fashion, run by a battery, that you can listen to while you're like walking or something, much like people used to use Sony Walkmans. But audios have changed over the years. Currently, they tend to be CD-ROMs. Now, video has changed quite a bit, too. When video first came out, a popular format was Betamax, which was only sold by Sony. But then, because Sony would not sell Betamax to other systems like RCA or JVC or something, those companies developed a system called VHS. Well, VHS, because it could be sold by many others, became very popular and drove out Betamax, which is actually, Betamax was a better format, but it was taken over by VHS, and even Sony had to do VHS. Now, later, there was Laserdisc, and libraries tended to use CDs. But CDs were replaced, or I mean DVDs, excuse me. But DVDs were eventually replaced by either, at one point it was HD or Blu-ray. Well, as time went on, Blu-ray took over from HD. HD went to the wayside, and so now it's either DVDs or Blu-rays. So the markets look at different types of media, but settle on one media. Now, usually audio and video can be put on a bookshelf, much like any other book. Because they fit very well on the shelves, both styles. But when it comes to photographs and maps, these tend to fit better in drawers. And so libraries that choose to use photographs and maps will use a drawer system to store them. Photographs are flat, maps, well, some of them are folded, should be actually laid out flat, because refolding a map wears it out faster than laying it flat. So photographs and maps, if libraries own them, should be in flat drawers. And so materials other than books and physically owned items, the shelving does depend on the material. Either a shelf, or like audio video, or a drawer system. Often photographs are actually put in protective sleeves in drawers, or to protect them from damage. Now, libraries can buy maps and different types of things. Photographs tend to be donated. An example I know of for a library is they own a collection of photographs that were donated, and what it was it's a realtor back near the turn of the century, 20th century, 1900s, who every time he sold a house, he would take photographs of the house. And so there's a large collection of photographs that were done by this realtor. And what happens is people that own the house and they're trying to do research, these are older houses, and they're trying to do research on the house, they can go to the library and look at the photographs that were done by this gentleman who may have sold their house in the past, and they can look at how the house looked like years prior, and they can get an idea of what the house was like. Nowadays, realtors will use digital walkthroughs for houses, and they're not kept. A physical photograph is kept for years, and so these photographs are over 100 years old. But it's not going to be likely with the digital age of a walkthrough on a house. So photographs tend to be donated. Now, there are special collections like the audio collections, like the G. Robert Vincent Voice Library at Michigan State University. The G. Robert Vincent Voice Library has voice collections that date back to the Edison cylinder days. Voices from people like Teddy Roosevelt or Amelia Earhart, and up to more current times. Now, the interesting thing when I talk to people at the Robert Vincent Voice Library is because the technology changes over the years from the Edison cylinder all the way up to the present time. They have to maintain all the physical items that would play those things. So, example, they have to have an Edison cylinder reader, an Edison cylinder that can play Edison cylinders. And they have to maintain all the equipment from that time, from then to now. So they have they not only have many audios, they also have the equipment to play the audios. Now, they don't always play, for example, they don't always play Edison cylinders, obviously. What they've done is they've digitized pretty much everything they have, and you can go to the G. Robert Vincent Voice Library and listen to the recordings they have back to the Edison cylinder days electronically, because what they've done is they've taken the old technology and digitized it. So even though they have the Edison cylinder and they have the player for the Edison cylinder, which they maintain because they own it, they also have digitized it so they don't have to play it all the time. So if you're interested in listening to old voices, go to the G. Robert Vincent Voice Library at Michigan State University, and you can hear people from years ago speaking. It's an interesting thing to take a look at. Now, ordering media is much like ordering books. You use catalogs, advertisements. You can use Library Journal, and some referring sources that include audio and video. Library Journal, for example, not only covers books, but also covers video, for example. The ordering process to order media is much like any other book material. Uses jobbers like Baker and Taylor, which also include media. As I mentioned, photographs tend to be donations. Map sources can be found in the book, the textbook. And say, for example, many libraries that may not have maps or photographs have at least one globe. Usually globes are bought through sources like Amazon, or can be gotten through jobbers like Demco, which specialize in libraries and sell things like that. So even libraries that don't have a lot of maps or photographs will, and don't even bother with drawers because they don't have those things, they'll at least have a globe in the library probably. Now, serials are more specific. Now, we're not talking electronic serials, we're talking print serials. But in general, the concept of serials, electronically or print, are based on the same topic, daily, weekly, monthly, etc. Newspapers, for example, are daily. There are some weekly newspapers. A lot of magazines and journals come out monthly. They may have different methodologies of coming out. They're anything received by a subscription. Now, if we're talking print, we're talking about in this topic, this part of it could be electronic or print. Now, there are also something referred to as irregularly received series. Often, this is really referring to print. There are publications that are considered like books, if you will, in many cases, that come out on an irregular basis. For libraries, it could be, for public libraries, it could be a series like, say, the publication for graphic novels like Bleach, which come out, 1, 2, 3, and Bleach. I worked in chemistry, and we used to get what's referred to as the American Chemical Society Symposium Series. Now, you could order we ordered on a subscription the American Society Symposium Series, and they were numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4. They're actually in like the 700s or something by now. They're probably in the thousands. But the point is, each one of them has a specific book title in the series. So you could actually order a specific symposium series as a book under a book title, or you could order the series and receive all of the series. Each one has its own specific title. It may be shelved in different spots in the collection, but you receive them as a subscription to the series. So when you talk about a serial, you're talking about any publication that's received by subscription, regardless of the time frame in which it comes out. Now, funding for serials, from a collection standpoint, can either be a serial account or a collection account. I've worked in both. Now, a serials account means that a library's got a specific set of serials that are bought, and usually it's done by a committee where the individuals in the committee look at ordering a set of serials, and usually done before it's broken down into the amount of money for the collections. I've worked in areas where you have a collection account that also covers serials. I used to have, in chemistry, we used the code CHE to represent anything ordered on chemistry, and we had CHEMO for books or monographs. We had CHEBL for any blanket order that we would order, depending on all dependent on where the money came from. But BL and MO were basically books. And then there was another one referred to as CHESR, or serial subscription. This meant that I was responsible for serials that came into the account, and I paid for them, even if I didn't have to pay for them monthly. There had to be an amount of money in the CHESR account to handle them for the year. Now, in this particular situation, in the sciences, the library liked it that you had no more than 80% in the serialist account and 20% in the monograph account. That was to cover any increases in serials for the year because it would come out of monographs. And then if you lost amount of money from the monographs to serials, you would have to cancel a serial to move it back into the monograph account. I was allowed to be 90-10 because I was so heavily serial based. But it did happen that you would have to cancel a serial publication to move it into the monographs. And in libraries that do have a serials account, not a collection account, you still have to maintain a certain level in the serials account in order to have money available for the collections account. But many libraries tend to use serials accounts rather than collection accounts. They can both exist. Now, finding aids for serials are usually much similar to book orders. You use catalogs and ads and articles found in a variety of publications. Once you order a serial, it tends to be a standing order, and it doesn't change unless the library chooses to discontinue the publication. There are also special finding aids that libraries will use and collections people can use as well, called the Ulrich's Periodical Directory, where you can look up who publishes a particular serial, how often it comes out, monthly, weekly, whatever. And you can order it from, it gives you information to be able to help order it. The methodology, once a serial is chosen, is handled by a serials department. And a serials ordering is usually a department within acquisitions. It's usually not part of acquisitions, but another section within the acquisitions department, or such, referred to as the serials department. And the trick in the serials department is they're actually maintaining the orders. They're making sure that the orders are ordered, and they maintain a copy of the receipt of the issues that are received by the library. If a issue does not come in, they in their receipt of issues, they see an issue came in and they're missing an issue, they can order missing issues. A lot of them will not order specifically from journal, one to another, unless, say, for example, like a newspaper, you might go directly to the newspaper to order it. They tend to use vendors like EBSCO as an example. And there are others, but EBSCO is a big one. What they do is the vendor will send all the copies of the publications to the library, and EBSCO operates in such a fashion that if a library is missing an issue, they don't have to go to each publisher to order a missing issue or something. They can go to a vendor and say, you didn't give us, we're missing this issue, and then the vendor will take care of the aspect of getting the missing issue, for example. A lot of times a library will lose an issue. They'll get the issue and they'll lose it. Vendors often replace it in any event because they want to maintain a good relationship with the ordering department. So the vendors operate to get a lot of the publications to a library without the library having to go to each individual location to order it. They can go to EBSCO and say, we need to get this new journal, and EBSCO will add it to the list of the publications they sent. Now, another aspect in libraries that's really not in the book, but I'm sure a lot of public libraries are familiar with these things. They're what's commonly referred to as the Library of Things. Library of Things cover things such, the first one I ever heard of was cake pads. A lot of public libraries especially will have items that they lend out. Cake pans, microscopes, tools, music, and more. A lot of times they'll have like little, for children, they'll have little kits, like Lego kits or little electronic experimental kits and different things. So library things is anything that a library owns that is not specifically a print type material, a physical item. Now, in many cases, the library will need to have a statement for the loan when necessary. For example, a tool should have a statement in the library, when they're borrowing the tool that says that you're responsible for the use of the tool, not the library. So a lot of times they'll have a statement that a person has to sign when they're borrowing something, like a tool. Some things won't need it. Lego kit, for example, won't need it, but something like a tool would. Now, when it comes to things like that, and I've seen seasonal disorder lamps, for example, the libraries lend. Whatever you lend that needs it, like tools and music or different things, you should have a documentation for the use. Particularly documentation that comes from the manufacturer. So, for example, if you lend a tool, you not only have a statement to protect yourself, but you should provide the documentation for the use of the item, especially if it's available from the manufacturer. A lot of times you can make photocopies of the different things that when the tool is lent, you make sure that the person gets a copy of all the documentation related to the tool that the manufacturer provided. Some things, like say a laptop, you might not have a printed item because you buy laptops today. You don't actually get a printed documentation on the use of the laptop. However, a lot of these sources will be electronically. You should try to get a printed copy to provide to the user. So even if it's an electronic copy, get a printed copy of the document that you can provide with the item. These things are useful, particularly to protect the library from the use of the item. It depends what it is. Obviously, you wouldn't do it for a cake pan, but you might do it for a tool. You might provide musical information if you lend out a guitar or something that like maybe a how to tune it, different things. But consider a statement to protect yourself from the loan, and consider providing documentation for the use of the loan. Now, any questions, you can send them to me to the virtual office discussion page. If you want to ask me something specifically, you can send me an email if you wish. But most of these topics we'll cover in discussions. Something that you may have learned, something that you may have a question about. Put those on the discussions and we can talk about them. A lot of things I may think about that I don't cover in a lecture or know about, didn't cover in a lecture, we can talk about those in the discussion. So thank you very much.